You can't be mad at Caleb Williams and his dad for not wanting to play for the Chicago Bears at first. You should be glad that they didn't make things messier and instead learn to embrace the team and the city.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on the show today, I want to go through the fallout of this bombshell ESPN report, details of a Seth Wickersham book where he talked to Caleb Williams and his dad, Carl Williams, about the pre-draft process. Didn't want to be picked by the Chicago Bears, wanted to be a Minnesota Viking instead. A lot of controversy surrounding this, but I think we're getting some of the wrong takeaways from this, that I think Caleb Williams and his dad were right about pretty much everything that they wanted. They didn't get everything that they wanted, but I think they were justified in feeling a lot of the ways that they did. And to me, this is a story more about like how grateful we should be that things didn't go differently. As bad as the actual season went for Caleb Williams, it could have gotten a lot worse a lot sooner. And I think Bears fans can be left feeling like, hey, this is headed in a much better direction than it could have been. So we'll take a look at where some of the blame belongs here and how things potentially could have gone worse and where things then lie moving forward. Because that's my big takeaway, is that Caleb Williams is right about this. And as much as you might not want that to be true, it is true. Like, yes, he and his dad thought the Bears were not a good place for a quarterback to go. That has been correct, at least in my entire lifetime and for some time before that. This has not been an organization with the kind of infrastructure to develop a quarterback. Caleb Williams and his dad were not confident in the Bears coaching staff, and particularly unhappy with offensive coordinator Shane Waldron being the hire there. And lo and behold, they were correct. And Caleb Williams and his dad were upset about, the rookie wage scale and thought his son deserved to be paid more money. Like, I think that's also true, even though maybe, you want him to just suck it up and play by the rules. I don't think they were unjust in wanting so many of the things that they wanted. Like, yes, a quarterback should have preferred Kevin O'Connell as an offensive coach to Matt Eberflus and Shane Waldron. So it just feels to me like there's a certain level of like, they were right, and I can't be mad about it. And so if I can't be mad about them being right about all of these things, what I can do is look at and see what Caleb Williams and to some extent his dad did in spite of all of their feelings about the Bears, and what everyone involved in this process did to get us to where we are today. And that's kind of what I leave as a takeaway here, is like, some of this stuff maybe we wondered about, some of this stuff maybe we had heard rumors or speculation or theories as to what the pre-draft process was like and what Caleb Williams did and didn't want. But from the moment Caleb Williams was drafted number 1 overall by the Chicago Bears, there was no semblance of a doubt that he was embracing this opportunity and was all in on making this work. Like, once he got to the point where he said, well, there's nothing else I can do. I'm going to be drafted number 1 of the Bears. This is the team I'm going to have to play for my rookie season. He leaned into that fully. He said, all right, this is my team. This is my offensive coordinator. This is my head coach. And despite my long list of reservations about those things ahead of time, there's now nothing I can do about it. So what can I do? Well, I can just try and make the most out of whatever this situation is going to be and have as much success as I possibly can squeeze out of it. And obviously, as a team, the Bears did not have that kind of success, and it led to the firing of Shane Waldron and then Matt Eberflus. But all along the way, Caleb Williams never caused a public problem. We don't know what was said behind the scenes, in the locker room, in meetings with coaches or with Ryan Poles or whatever, but we never heard about Caleb Williams being truly disgruntled. I mean, there were players that were upset about the offense, and that was all reasonable stuff, but there was never a whisper of Caleb doesn't want to be here. There was never a whisper of, is Caleb going to want to be traded, right? None of this stuff was a part of the controversy around Matt Eberflus and Shane Waldron. It was just universally agreed that hey, these were bad coaches that did poorly, but it could have been Caleb making it so much more messy. There could have been more leaks. And we'll talk about how, especially in the draft process, that this could have gone worse. But Caleb sat there and took his medicine. He put up with it and kind of shut up about it. For whatever he and his dad were worried about and complaining about in the pre-draft process, Caleb Williams ate it, swallowed his pride, and said, let's get to work. Let's make this happen. And you can only imagine then that as Caleb says, all right, I got to make the best out of this worst situation, this less than ideal spot, less than ideal team, even worse than that, coaches, how I'll try and make this worse the best I can, all while watching Jaden Daniels go one pick later to a Washington Commanders team that also didn't deserve any benefit of the doubt as far as organizational stability goes. I don't think Jaden Daniels was drafted to Washington and everyone said, wow, this is clearly going to be this home run fit right out of the draft. But as it turns out, Caleb Williams is quarterback coach, as Jaden Daniels offensive coordinator, leads them to a super successful rookie season. And can you imagine how much that had to hurt for Caleb Williams? Not only in general, it hurts when you see a direct competitor, your rival in some ways, going and being more successful than you. That's always going to hurt. But especially when you know deep down inside that you were put in a position that you didn't want to be put at and that you knew would hold you back from being able to be as successful as that other person, right? It's not like Caleb Williams could come to Chicago, give it his best shot, and you know what? Jaden Daniels was still just better. And sometimes you have to chalk it up and say, you know what? You got the best of me. You were better than I was. I can be honorable in defeat there. But if you're Caleb Williams, aren't you looking around going, gosh darn it, I knew this would happen. I knew this team wasn't going to put me in a position to succeed. I knew this offensive coordinator was going to screw me. And all of it happened the way Caleb thought it would, and he still just had to watch it happen and had to watch Jaden Daniels succeed with his college coach. And for Caleb Williams to experience all of that and not make it more of a public stink says a lot about Caleb Williams' character and a lot about his commitment to the Bears and his willingness to see this out, right? And I think we should be grateful for that he could have been fed up with all of this and made much more of a stink and much more of a trouble. He could have demanded to be traded at the deadline. Fire Shane Waldron or you got to trade me. Or even after they fire Shane Waldron, fire Eberflus, say, trade me. I can't win here. Get me the heck out of here. And he didn't. At least publicly, he stayed quiet, kept his head down, kept working, was humble and gracious at every turn, and always tried to remain optimistic and hardworking and just tried to figure it out. And to me, all of this is makes me feel better about Caleb Williams. It's more endearing to Caleb Williams rather than revealing some sort of, dramatic diva personality behind the scenes. No, how he acted in public says everything. And the fact that he felt differently in private speaks even greater to the way that he acted with the Chicago Bears. Now, clearly, the broad, take a step back from Caleb specifically, the broader story here is Chicago Bears dysfunction. And Ryan Poles has been here to oversee all of that, but blame also goes to Matt Eberflus, of course, and a lot to Shane Waldron. So how do you sort of piece together, does firing Eberflus and changing out Ben Johnson forgive all sins here? Or is there still some lingering concern about how Ryan Poles kind of screwed this up in the process? Or does he get some credit for holding the ship together? I want to explore Ryan Poles' role in all of this next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. If you're looking at this Bears schedule that just dropped this week and trying to figure out what games you want to go to, the best place to get tickets on the secondary market is with our friends at Gametime. There's nothing like being there in the seats to see all the highs and lows, the biggest moments, and to watch Caleb Williams develop in his second year. And Gametime makes it fast and easy to get your tickets. Price on the app even drop as you get closer to tip-off. And so with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Gametime is a total game changer. I have the Gametime app on my phone. I've used it to go to Bears games. I'm using it to go see comedian Daniel Tosh coming up in a couple weeks here. I go to concerts on Gametime because the app is super easy and it makes the ticket buying experience so much better than the other guys. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So when you have this much dysfunction surrounding one of the most important decisions perhaps in franchise history, to take Caleb Williams number one overall, right? One of the most consequential draft picks ever. You start to look around and say, everyone who's involved in any way, shape, or form deserves some blame here, right? This is clearly a Matt Eberflus was a big problem. Hiring Shane Waldron was a big problem, and getting rid of those two guys is a big step in the right direction. But this also feels to me like something that you can't just say, well, Ryan Poles fired the coaches, so he's good. You know, that was all Eberflus and Warren, and Waldron that were the problem. And now you can move on and say, you know, that's all good. And Poles has Ben Johnson, so things are going to go. Like, at some point, Ryan Poles is culpable to some degree here. How much is the real debate, right? Because he's involved in all these pre-draft processes, right? He's a big part of trying to get Caleb Williams to be here. But also, bigger than that, I should say, Ryan Poles chose to bring back Matt Eberflus for Caleb Williams' rookie season. Ryan Poles came out and said, I'm sticking with Eberflus. I believe in Eberflus and the direction of the team under his leadership. Ryan Poles oversaw the hiring of Shane Waldron. Waldron got multiple interviews in that process. I think he might have been the only offensive coordinator candidate to get multiple interviews in this process. And maybe you can make an argument that, hey, Ryan Poles was hands-off and said, Matt Eberflus, you get your offensive coordinator. I'll let you go. I find that hard to believe. No one has reported that. I just, if you're trying to play devil's advocate here, so you could make that argument, but I find it hard to believe that a general manager wouldn't be intimately involved in selecting the offensive coordinator who he knew was going to coach the quarterback that he took with the number one overall pick. Like, this was all a very deliberate process to try and set up a situation for Caleb Williams, and they failed horribly in every way, shape, and form. And sure, a lot of that's Eberflus and Waldron, but Ryan Poles is the guy who, at the very least, signed off on those decisions. At the very worst, encouraged those decisions. Somewhere in between, it's 100% his choice and it's, something he had to approve either way. That looks very, very poorly upon Ryan Poles. Like, that was a mistake at the time. We said it on the podcast here, and many Bears fans shared that opinion of like, yes, they should have fired Eberflus then. It's not hindsight to look back and say, oh yeah, well, they should have fired. No, we said at the time, don't bring this guy back for another season. And the Bears chose to. And Kevin Warren was involved in that process too. Like, Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles, this goes all the way to the top of they almost completely blew it with Caleb Williams. And still completely blew it for his rookie season, I suppose. But there's still time for this to turn around. And we're still optimistic about what can happen in year two with Ben Johnson and beyond. And so I'm torn here because this seems like the kind of nonsense that you would say, oh, well, fire Ryan Poles. This is fire. Or he should, maybe not now, but he should have been fired for having things go this poorly. And maybe that's the case. Maybe you say, hey, if you get to the firing of Matt Eberflus and Shane Waldron, that because Ryan Poles was so involved in how bad they botched this for Caleb Williams, maybe he should have been fired then. But I can also see where if you take it a step farther back and look a little bit bigger picture here, Ryan Poles did successfully keep it from getting worse. And I realize it's like, okay, yes, the fire burned down the house, but Poles kept it from burning down the neighborhood. So that's, but it still burned down the house, like I understand it's not saying like, wow, he turned out to have made great decisions there. But I do think the fact that you still have Caleb Williams, that Caleb Williams is happy to be here, and that you've now paired him with Ben Johnson, the fact that there's still a bright future for Caleb Williams in Chicago is somewhat of a credit to Ryan Poles for finding ways to still salvage this situation. And I'm not saying we should praise Ryan Poles. And I don't think he comes out as a net positive out of this situation. But my point is that I don't think this is 100% all negative from Ryan Poles, because in the ESPN story with the reporting from Seth Wickersham, one of the keys that stood out to me that I think I haven't seen people talk about a lot is that, Caleb Williams and his dad are like, we don't want to play for the Bears. And Ryan Poles played hardball and said, we're drafting you no matter what. There was a quote in there. It was a short quote, but Ryan Poles stood firm and told Williams, quote, we're drafting you no matter what. And I think his lack of fear there and lack of folding and bending, however he handled that situation, did end up working out. Like that specific moment there. Obviously, keeping Eberflus and Waldron, that didn't work out, but his ability to stay firm there and not give in and not explore more trade options there and not let Caleb Williams and his dad dictate the situation is what kind of forced Caleb back to the Bears and to embrace this situation. Because Caleb Williams said, and the reporting in there was like, Caleb Williams didn't want to, quote, nuke the city. That he didn't want to make a tough situation worse. That yes, Caleb could have pulled a full-on Eli Manning and publicly come out and said, I'm not going to the Bears, trade me, make a big, big mess that could have ruined all of these plans and probably led to Poles getting fired if he wasn't able to draft Caleb Williams. And, they have a bad season without Caleb Williams. I think he ends up getting I think he gets canned there. His ability to keep this thing together long enough to now get Ben Johnson for Caleb Williams. Again, yes, he started the fire, but he also mostly put it out. And there's something to be said about at least he figured out a way to get things right, to correct some mistakes there, recognize what was going wrong, and do something about it. And that's not me saying, oh, you should have full faith in Ryan Poles moving forward then, because no, clearly there have been a lot of mistakes along the way here, and he's lucky to still be the Bears general manager, given how this all played out. But it absolutely could have been worse, and Poles deserves some kind of something for not letting it get worse. And I kind of want to put a pin on this and explore a little bit deeper on what this would have looked like, what this could have looked like. Why was Caleb Williams then unsuccessful in not getting away from the Chicago Bears? And what was brewing behind the scenes that could have ultimately undone all of this optimism that we have for the future and leave the Bears as, the embarrassing NFL franchise that it was? I want to take a look at some of the differences between what we got and what we could have gotten next on Locked On Bears. Caleb Williams could have easily gone full Eli Manning here. That was not out of the question whatsoever. That he could have been firm, put his foot down and said, I am not playing for the Chicago Bears. And Carl Williams could have come out and said, my son is not playing for the Chicago Bears. And that would have opened up such a Pandora's box that I'm not sure we could have seen this quick of a recovery from, right? To where the Bears are now still in contention, right? Yes, if you had been forced to trade Caleb Williams, you would have gotten a certain amount of compensation that would have helped the Chicago Bears. But the roster would be nowhere near where it is right now. And I think we would be starting from square one, from scratch again in Chicago right now in 2025, as opposed to where they are now a little bit farther along in this team building process. So I guess first and foremost here, there was never a reality where Caleb Williams was going to be a Minnesota Viking. We can put that out the window right now. Yes, Caleb wanted to play for Kevin O'Connell and thought the Vikings as an organization would be a lot more stable for him, and he's probably right about that. But there was no way that no matter what level of stink Caleb Williams rose, whatever level of mess he wanted to make, that was never going to result in the Minnesota Vikings drafting Caleb Williams. Now, in the story, they reported that his dad and him looked into like, well, what if he skipped the draft and went to the UFL and played for a season there and then came back in 2025 and tried to enter the NFL as like an unrestricted free agent? And then could he have signed with the Minnesota Vikings that way? Sure. No, because that wouldn't have worked, but they explored non-draft options to potentially get to the Minnesota Vikings. But there was no way that through the mechanism of the NFL draft, Caleb Williams would become a Minnesota Viking. So at best, Caleb Williams could have caused a lot of trouble and gotten traded to some other team. Presumably, would he want to go to the Washington Commanders? I mean, we talked about this earlier with Jaden Daniels, right? Yes, Cliff Kingsbury was the offensive coordinator, so probably, but brand new owner, brand new head coach, and a team that had the reputation of being one of the worst run franchises in the NFL for the last couple of decades, the Washington football team. Right? Everything that happened with Dan Snyder there did not scream organizationally like a great place for a young quarterback to go to. Now, Dan Quinn turned things around, and the new ownership there and the new general manager have all done a good job, but we didn't know that at the time of the draft. We knew they were likely to be better, but we didn't know they would be as good of a landing spot as they would. So is it that, or do you go to, the third overall pick then would have been the New England Patriots, where they had Gerard Mayo and they fired their coach after one season and replaced him with Mike Vrabel. Like, part of the problem for Caleb, and I think part of what advantaged the Bears here, is that the true alternatives for him just weren't really that realistic. What other teams would have been reasonable landing spots for Caleb Williams to go to? I mean, you've got maybe the Giants at 6 that year when they took Malik Neighbors. If Caleb Williams demanded a trade and if he said, I'll play for this team, the Giants, with Brian Dable and Joe Shane struggling there, not so much. The Falcons took Michael Penix at 8. The Falcons, the type of quarterback infrastructure that you want to see given how things have gone there, I'm not sure that there's this. The Vikings were a great team on paper, but not realistic because of the divisional matchup. Maybe it's the Broncos at 12 and Sean Payton, and you look at that team and say, hey, Sean Payton's the coach and the Broncos have been a winning organization, that maybe I'd want to go there. But then how does Denver get Caleb Williams from where they were drafting at that time, right? And everything you would have to give up to trade up to 1 for Caleb Williams. And I realize leverage becomes a challenge there, because if Caleb Williams is truly making a mess and demanding, maybe you don't get as much for him as you would have hoped to. But I would imagine, given how firm Ryan Poles was playing this, that if Caleb Williams had come out and said, I'm not going to play for the Bears, trade me, don't draft me, whatever, don't you still just draft Caleb Williams and kind of call his bluff and say, okay, you're going to sit out your whole rookie contract? You're going to sit out and not sign the deal and not get paid? Are you good? We'll play ball, because at that time the Bears hadn't traded Justin Fields yet. It wasn't until after the combine and after Caleb Williams had agreed, like, hey, I'm going to go to the Bears. It was after meeting with the Bears and going to Hallis Hall, he built a comfort level along the way with Chicago and said, all right, I'm in, and kind of told the team, hey, I'm in, let's do this. Then they traded Justin Fields. But until they traded Justin Fields, if Caleb Williams had come out in February or in January, like a lot of this was early in the winter there, and said, I'm not playing for the Bears, I want to play for the Vikings, I want to play for somebody else, then the Bears could have kept Justin Fields and drafted Caleb Williams and said, all right, sit out. We're not going to play. We're not going to trade you. So you can either show up and play, or you can sit and not make any money and and kind of waste away and lose a value here. Like the Bears were in a position to play hardball there. And, if Caleb Williams eventually showed up, then you could trade Justin Fields after the fact. But I just think given the forces and the structure of the NFL draft and the contract situation and what the Bears had, like they could have stuck this out. Now, obviously, it would have been super messy. And if Caleb Williams had then eventually come around, like it's a lot harder to clean up and he's coming in late and there's Justin Fields drama. But I just don't think there was a lot of incentive for the Bears to go along with Caleb Williams getting messy, because whatever you end up trading Caleb Williams for in that situation is never going to equate the value of getting a number 1 overall pick quarterback correct, right? If Caleb Williams throws a fit and then, demands a trade with the Washington Commanders, I guess, or whatever, and you end up getting Jaden Daniels instead of Caleb Williams, where are you today, right? What does Jaden Daniels do in this Bears offense this season? Not much. Given how much was built around Jaden Daniels in Washington, if the Bears had been forced to trade Caleb to Washington and they took Daniels instead, like that Commanders offense with Cliff Kingsbury made it as easy as possible on Jaden Daniels to help him be successful. So what he's doing in Chicago when Caleb Williams says Shane Waldron wasn't watching film with him, he had to watch film on his own, how that's going for Jaden Daniels and where we're feeling about the Bears team right now, it could have been even worse. Like it's impressive what Caleb Williams was able to do in spite of that lack of support and structure. To have Caleb Williams come within, what was it? Within 100 and some odd, or no, within 27 yards and 5 touchdowns of Jaden Daniels' rookie season, given everything he had, like it speaks to how impressive what Caleb Williams did in Chicago was and how farther set back the Bears would be had he really truly raised that stink from the get-go. And I think the Bears' ability to convince him not to, or to work with him enough to not to, says, hey, they didn't do a good job overall, but they did a good job of putting out the fire that they started once they started that fire. And I will take that as a silver lining and as reason to think, hey, maybe things will be fine from here. That all this stuff happened in the past and there was a lot of problems going on behind the scenes, clearly, but we're kind of through that and past that for now and can kind of move forward from this. I am left wondering a little bit what might linger and if Carl Williams might pop up again in the future, depending on what happens with Caleb and the Bears. And I want to look future forward on what happens from here then on the next episode of Locked On Bears. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and that includes all of your favorite sports teams. We have Locked On Bulls, Locked On Cubs, Locked On White Sox, Locked On Blackhawks, or if you're fans of other teams from other cities in those sports, we've got all of the major national sports covered, plus Locked On College Sports as well for all of the top programs across the country. So go make a Locked On podcast, another Locked On podcast, your second listen today. Coming back on Monday for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity for you to bear down.